Got it. All right, so this is Inspiration Hour, and as you guys know, we do this once a month, and we started doing it probably 6 months ago or so, and we've had just some stellar, brilliant folks with us to share everything from Montessori to a personal trainer who's thinking about how to learn, be a lifelong learner, higher ed, leadership and learning with somebody from Amsterdam. So a few of you guys have been here for almost all of them, I think, and it's just really fun to kind of stretch our brains and get together once a month. And you're all invited for all of them moving forward. And we have Taylor today. I'm so excited that he's come to be with us. And he is based in Denver, and he's doing just some amazing, amazing work in Ed3, Web3 stuff. And so he and I, and Colin, who's here also, have had some just stellar conversations about futurism and what's going on in this space for the last 2 or 3 years. And yeah, so I'm excited for him to share with us, and then we'll have a little time for discussion and Q&A at the end. So I'll hand it over to you, Taylor.
Awesome. Thank you, Erin. And yeah, good to see some new faces and also some familiar ones. Nadine, it's been a while. We'll have to maybe find some time. Good to see you. Yeah, thanks, Erin, for doing these. I love, often I think we are on Zoom, but in a more formal capacity. I'm hoping this is, inspirational, but also conversational, and want to run through a few slides and get a sense of sort of some of our work and how I'm entering this sort of intersection of Web3 and education, but then certainly want to just make it an open dialogue. So hopefully everyone's up for that. So let me jump right in, and I'm gonna share here. Cool. So everyone's seeing that okay? Awesome. So yeah, this sort of intersection, again, Web3 and both sort of current state, but also just what the evolution of technology ultimately represents for education and education systems. And I think it's a world we all at least intersect with, if not sort of live in every day, every hour. I know Erin and folks at Desklight are there. So just wanted to sort of unpack the way we think about it, some of the things we're working on, and hopefully open some doors to some interesting new ideas and some potential to even collaborate, work on some things. So before I dive right in, wanted to give just sort of some high level background on me and kind of how I guess I see myself in this world, and how I landed sort of in this work. I, as Erin mentioned, I'm based in Denver, but actually grew up in Evergreen, a little bit west of Denver in the foothills. Spent a lot of time in the mountains and just sort of thinking a lot, exploring open spaces. Have only come to value that more, I guess, as I've grown older. It's one of those things you really don't understand until you get tossed into the wild world and understand how much value can come from your upbringing and sort of where you were able to live as a kid. So more and more I find direct connections to having sort of grown up and lived in a very exploratory space, and how that intersects with the current work, which is Learning Economy Foundation, which I'll jump into. We certainly sort of live in the mountains and the clouds and have a lot of interesting analogies around sort of learners being able to climb mountains and find their way across varying paths to opportunity. So just wanted to lay that out as sort of some background as far as myself. And now we'll dig into, I guess, some of the current ways I'm thinking about, and this is again just a this will be very high level. All of this I'm going to gloss over pretty quick because I really want to just open up the conversation. SSI, this idea of self-sovereign identity, again, also ties back to, I think, the mountaineer in me and others being able to have agency and sort of autonomy over yourself, but also your sort of learning and your path through the world. These are just some terms that often get associated with that notion of self-sovereign identity also directly ties into this sort of emergent world of Web3 and the future of the internet and just sort of our digital lives broadly. So, I think a lot of these probably will resonate. One, if not all, probably intersect your work in some way. So just sort of wanted to frame it with some of these high level principles that sort of underpin some of the thinking and some of the technology. So that sort of as high level framing by way of just some sort of concepts and terms. This is as far as we'll go in sort of unpacking this idea of Web3, but I think offers decent framing on just sort of how we've gotten to the place we're in. Web 1 and sort of the initial sort of instantiations of the internet itself, was really about sort of those on one end of a spectrum publishing and providing information to the broader masses and sort of the populace at large. So this sort of again, and this is not a critique necessarily so much as just a sort of high level outline of sort of where we've been and where we're going. So yeah, Web 1 was really owned by a small number of what we would consider publishers, very one way, singular in its direction. Information was flowing from those sort of core publishers out. Web 2, which I'd say we're still sort of in the middle of, is owned by platforms. And this is just an easy way to remember publishers, platforms, and people. But yeah, we all know that now. Like the internet itself is really controlled by a small number of key platforms and players. Google, Amazon, the crew. Facebook, Meta, losing traction, I think, in a healthy way recently. But and then Web3, I think, is this evolution towards taking what's been built, but being able to offer ownership back to the people. And so this is sort of as much as it was always sort of baked into the way folks thought about information being distributed across this World Wide Web, it really never sort of came to full fruition. And so Web3 is sort of this idea of sort of turning back to the roots of the internet and trying to give anyone sort of agency and ownership over the data and over the things that they ultimately create in digital spaces. So just framing on that. So now I want to just sort of get directly into some of our work and give you a sense of sort of how, given that we see that sort of new evolution of the internet coming to be, sort of where we sit when it comes to education. So I would say where we're at is really kind of 2.3, 2.4, maybe 2.5 in that sort of move towards a fully realized Web3. But a couple of ideas and concepts that we see core to helping to bridge all of that into education is this idea of PVCs, programmable verifiable credentials. This isn't a term you'll find much on. We're trying to sort of push this idea as our work evolves. Verifiable credentials are certainly a standard and something some may have heard of. But this idea of sort of layering programmability into credentials that can be certified, verified, is sort of interesting and novel. And then with those, this idea of digital wallets. Again, this is also not a new concept or term, but we think there's interesting things you can do when you sort of program and have trust and verification built into a credential that then can have front-facing applications like wallets that sort of live on a device or on the web. All of this is centered around this sort of broad idea of just a trust ecosystem. This is by far the most sort of technical slide, but the easy analog here is obviously our financial lives and digital payments. We use that quite a bit just to talk about, sort of retailers, stores, individuals as sort of those interacting, and then banks, either local or sort of state-run or even nationally sanctioned banks that ultimately allow these sort of full cycle systems of payment to product or service, all of that to come to be. We don't really have good versions of this, what's considered sort of the trust triangle between, again, issuer, provider, verifier here, and then in our case, a learner that can sort of sit at the center and actually be able to interact and receive and make use of credentials. So a lot of the work right now in this sort of Web 2.5 world that we are trying to sort of bring to life is that sort of notion of an issuer, which again could be a school, could be an education provider of any kind, could be a university, and there's this verification process and this sort of trust that currently is very manual and very sort of relationship based. Often it's just a signal from a school that happens to have a good reputation. Getting a degree from Harvard still means something, but it doesn't have a whole lot other than historical legacy to say, this is somewhere where apparently smart people go and they learn a lot of things and they'll be of value to a company or society. What doesn't exist is a sort of a system where that sort of trust can be baked in digitally and isn't necessarily just reliant on social capital as it currently exists. So again, high level, this is just sort of the broader notion of this trust ecosystem that we think things like verifiable credentials and digital wallets are a piece of. There's many parts to this equation and this puzzle, but these are just some of the things we're working on directly at Learning Economy. So sort of tip of the spear and some of the newest work we've been playing with is this idea of a learn card. And again, the hope, is to actually build this into physical cards to sort of, bring some accessibility to some of these ideas. We're not fully there. These are not like, MasterCard is not issuing learn cards currently, but I think the trajectory is towards that sort of future. And digitally being able to, we lean into these verbs that I think really represent the power of sort of building this trust ecosystem and having sort of applications, whether it's a digital wallet or a physical card, on the front end of that learners can actually make use of. Issuing, earning, storing, sharing, spending. These are not things we typically think about as like packaged into one product for education necessarily. Just a couple examples of real things that we're working on currently that do sort of have that sort of trust ecosystem built in sort of natively behind the scenes. One, Super Skills League. This is an application we've been working on in partnership with the Lego Foundation. Bump Colin or Chris, I think, that are here. Probably Colin, if anyone wants to get a sense of this work. Really fun sort of quest-based app for kids that connects to Lego's holistic skills. And as kids, or this is again, that trust architecture is something that we're sort of working on under the hood to allow for this sort of app like this for Lego to sort of be accessible, be fun, allow for skills to be built, but also have verified skills and credentials that sort of surface from completing certain tasks and going through certain activities. So certainly this could be extended beyond this work, but this is one sort of demonstration. And the beauty of it is, we really tried to tackle some of the toughest privacy challenges. And so working with Lego and having to ensure that we sort of take all things into consideration when it comes to kids accessing apps and sort of creating data that hopefully is useful to them in the world. That's sort of a starting place. This is an extension of that. Again, under the hood is still this sort of trust ecosystem with those sort of verifiable credentials baked in. This is again just sort of an idea of those verbs sort of coming to life, where you could have skills, yes, as currency, but also digital currency potentially as we know it. and sort of, a sort of one-stop shop that allows you to, have and control your data and make use of it in the world, whether that's getting a job or just finding other opportunities. So again, this is sort of the vision of some of this stuff coming to life. We're working on this currently with a community college in Tennessee. This is sort of branded under this idea of a metaversity. As you sort of build out these sorts of underlying trust architectures, you then can do other fun things and useful things like building out pathways, helping sort of navigate and offer specific signals for students to understand what the next credential, what the right assessment, like, as opposed to sort of just guessing or having learning happen to us. It's more about like self-directed. How can I get some insight into like what's meaningful? And again, the idea is that a lot of this can be sort of all part of the same package. So, a student that happens to earn a few credentials at, in this case, Montlow Community College in Tennessee, could just as easily go and, take another course or go through a Lego learn activity, whatever it might be, as long as it's built on that same sort of architecture under the hood that involves some, this is sort of the just trust me, but there is some just cryptography and some interesting means of ensuring trust, again, much in the way that we trust that we can, go put our credit card into some portal online and assume that information is safe and secure. Same idea. So again, just another sort of view into what some of this could and is currently looking like. And so I know that was a wild ride, super fast sort of dive into kind of some of our work, but I really did want this to be more of a conversation. So this is sort of, Chris Dixon is somebody, love him or hate him, he's a little bit provocative, works at A16Z, and I think is sort of one of the few pioneers in Web3 that's really trying to push some of these ideas. This is his sort of definition that I think is pretty succinct. An internet owned by users and builders orchestrated with tokens. So we hear a lot about various sort of tokens and cryptocurrencies, NFTs, these sorts of things, these native digital assets that live online, much in the way that is sort of his thought around how Web3 is sort of going to come to be and is currently taking shape. We think, maybe there's a future where education is owned and controlled, not entirely, but more so by learners and orchestrated with this idea of sort of PVCs, digital wallets, new trust architecture, where credentials and skills actually, live with me, and I can sort of, create opportunity for myself, go find the right path up the mountain that really suits me, as opposed to, having it directed by others. So that's the quick wrap. Because this is sort of the intersection of Web3 and education and our work at Learning Economy, I figured I'd share for anyone in Denver next year. ETH Denver is a pretty interesting and exciting opportunity to come get exposure to some of the folks building this space. That's an NFT on the left. That's my Buffacorn at Red Rocks. So this is just an idea of some of these digital assets coming to life in the world. But that's a really just good opportunity for those that might be in Denver in late February, early March next year. There'll be about 15 to 20,000 folks coming to Denver globally, about, I think, typically 50 plus countries represented. Really, really good just opportunity to get exposure to those sort of working at the forefront of a lot of this stuff. It's centered around Ethereum, which is, it's a blockchain much like Bitcoin, but the folks there cross all sorts of industries and different tech. It's not specific to Ethereum necessarily. Yeah, and then again, Learning Economy as a nonprofit, trying to just sort of push these sorts of ideas and this technology out into the world. We are moving quickly. A lot of this stuff is here now, and we're starting to demonstrate that it really does have impact and is meaningful. So if it's interesting or you have thoughts or ideas on how it might plug into what you're up to, then feel free to just reach out or use any of those. I know we're all probably connected in one way or another. So that was fast, sorry, but yeah, hopefully we've got time to now just have a chat.
Yeah, all good. Thanks, Taylor. That was awesome. Yeah, I'm sure everybody has a slew of questions and thoughts and things, big and small. And I'll just start by saying, Taylor, I'm sure you agree, there's no silly questions here. Wherever you're coming from, whatever your knowledge base is in this discussion, I'm sure Taylor will entertain your questions and meet you there, because I know it's a dense topic for some. And for some, it's not, and have maybe more sort of advanced questions around, what Taylor could bring to the table here. So, so feel free, if you're eating lunch, if you're off camera, you can text in a question on the chat, and I'm happy to hold that up for you. If not, feel free to ask. I'll kick us off though, as everybody's kind of thinking about their questions. The Learn card, Taylor, like, what are you learning? What are you inspired by with a partner like the community college in Tennessee? Like, what are they open to? What needs to change about the world and other higher ed universities and community colleges for others to follow suit and kind of join that kind of concept and that kind of strategy? What do you think?
Yeah.
Big question. Let's start.
No, I think there's a lot. I mean, shout out to Dr. Michael Torrance, the president there, as just a visionary that was willing to go on this ride with us. I think what initially sort of kicked off some of that work and what excited him, and I think what we get excited about when it comes to just community colleges broadly, and also we also have a project with refugees in Europe, and so starting with populations that don't often have easy, obvious access to opportunity in Tennessee, where he's at. A large portion of these students were born, in these smaller rural areas in Tennessee, Smyrna, Montlow, so that, a large portion are born there. They'll go to school there. They'll often, work at 4 or 5 major, they have a few big car manufacturing plants, Nissan, also some big robotics facilities. So they kind of know the path that students often take and sort of what the opportunities are. So he got excited about this idea of, if we can, get students that are motivated, through and earn certain credentials that are of value to a lot of these local employers, can we make this happen quicker, more efficiently, and to at a lower cost for the students across the community college that he's operating. So I think it was that, just like, is there a way to build efficiency into these existing sort of pathways that we know exist in the state? The goal beyond Montlow is to actually expand it out beyond that network. So he has connections to the Tennessee Higher Education Commission. So, the sort of second, well, probably third phase, we're sort of doing a smaller pilot, and then that'll roll into a broader effort there. And then longer term would be, if we can demonstrate that this is really important and useful, then, potentially something that can roll out to the state. But I think that's just like, there was, again, some trust on his part. We built a really good relationship, and he's like, we can do better. We can do better for kids. There's a lot of folks that just don't find their way to the opportunity that we already know to exist locally. Mm-hmm. So that's probably the main thing that seeded it.
Awesome. Ellen, you want to ask that question that you put in the chat?
Oh yeah. I love this. I love what you guys are doing. It's so exciting to me. It really is. And I'm wondering, these types of things, like I read about the Indiana Achievement Wallet and what they're doing too around like similar kind of platform. And I'm wondering, like, if as these things pop up, as these awesome platforms pop up, do they play together? Is there like the central spine of like a blockchain that they all like access and can interchangeably work together?
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly the hope and the goal. So that's why we're focused intently on these sort of national or global standards. Verifiable credentials are, things that this is a technology that's been incubated within W3C, which is the World Wide Web Consortium, the standard setting body for the internet. The reason we can do this right now, voice over IP, is because of W3C. The reason we can send an email and have a shared means of, that's a sort of shared protocol on how that works technically, it's W3C. So yeah, all of the LearnCard tech under the hood is built on this universal wallet specification that is meant to allow for just that. There are plenty of opinions and versions of these things, literally hundreds at this point. We know most of, probably not all, but we know most of them. And some of them, you know, have taken specific directions and made decisions because, you know, there is money to be made. And I think our hope as a nonprofit and a sort of steward of open public goods, that's sort of core to our mission, is to ensure that if we're building these things out, that they're low to no cost and that they are interoperable. So yeah, the Indiana Achievement Wallet does rely on some of the same tech. There's, you know, there's 5 or 6 wallets that we are sort of connecting with, and there's actually a big event coming up toward the end of the year that Jobs for the Future is putting on with the National Governors Association, this idea of a plug fest. So a lot of these vendors all come together, and can we demonstrate that they all do work together and that they are interoperable?
Oh, cool.
Cool.
So it's not easy work, but it's totally the goal. And please, like, that's part of our goal in doing a lot of stuff like this, is like push back. If these things should not come with crazy price tags. If there's a big marketing team behind, you know, a singular wallet, like, to me, that's a problem. We used to be pretty neutral. We will now take a pretty hard stand in saying, this tech is here, these standards are here, they're open, they're meant to be for everyone, regardless of kind of where they are, what access they have. So push back on expensive wallets, please.
Yeah. Well, with that, Taylor, like in the spirit of inspiration, like, what's a decade from now look like, ideally, in your mind, based on all the conversations you're having about the tech and how it supports? What could that look like if everyone's playing well together and there's an equity to it? What does that look like? Like, what's a day in the life of a learner if that starts to happen?
Yeah, I mean, this comes back to that sort of Chris Dixon quote. We've been pushing this idea of the internet of education. And I think that, you know, I don't think it'll be 10 years out. A fully realized, like, quite literal seamless internet of education where no matter where you learn, you're able to play. Sure, it's not going to evolve, I'm sure, the way we assume it will, but the hope and vision is that, yeah, any learning opportunity where there is means of, this does get into some like sticky territory of like, where's the quality assurance come from? How do you trust those that are instilling trust? Again, accreditation still matters, like universities aren't going anywhere. But the hope and, you know, our sort of vision and goal with some of these tools and building out some of these networks is to demonstrate that, like, students are already learning everywhere anyway. You know, YouTube is the second most popular search engine on earth after Google. And that's because that's where people go to learn things or kill time and entertain themselves. But
And
all
TikTok
that said,
now and all of that. Yeah.
Yeah, people are learning everywhere anyway, whether it's digital or physical space. So it's like, given that that's the case, can they own parts of this investment in the digital world, right? Right now, we go and spend a bunch of time. We don't really create any sort of record of ownership, or there's no value. Right now, we're still in this world of platforms where, you know, YouTube and some influencers typically are like really extracting all the value by way of the advertising model. That's a whole nother conversation. But yeah, like, that's the hope and vision, is that if I want to learn something and I'm going to, you know, benefit all the way down to the most local level, all the way up to, you know, societally, if I'm going to learn something that's of value, whether that's, you know, art or music or hard sciences, like any of that, they're of value depending on sort of where you sit, that I should, yeah, be able to sort of have control over the record of demonstrating that I went through that process and that I'm, you know, and that just like flips the entire model of just motivation, right? The hope is that then students are intrinsically motivated to go and pursue their passions, because like, and I'm doing it right now, like in the Web3 world, there's a lot of time I spend online where I'm now accruing value by way of some of these cryptocurrencies and things. So it's possible for sure. But to have that all realized and equitable and everyone actually having access, that, there's a little work to be done to get there.
Yeah, I love it. I'll ask one more question on that and then hand it over to everybody else. Like, how young can a person be, or should a person be, to have a Learn card, ideally? So connecting the K-12 conversation to the higher ed conversation a little bit, or life skills in general. What do you think is what's possible?
Yeah, I'd rather tee up Colin. That's his world, but it's super skills certainly involves or can involve a guardian. So anybody is the answer. But that obviously still takes the front end of it. Doesn't, you don't have to understand any of the credentials and we actually use the ceramic network, which is a means of distributing the storage. So we don't hold the data. Lego doesn't have to hold the data. It's actually distributed. So the learner quite literally owns that data. But again, they don't care or know that if they're younger. So yeah, I don't know, Colin, what else would you add? But I think, the answer is hopefully anybody.
Yeah, I think some of these conversations that we've had just recently, we were at a little summit with some of the Lego partners talking exactly about this, and how the something like the Super Skills app and the learning credentials that are in there can be connected to what happens in early childhood and daycares around at least the United States and different parts of the world. Ideally those systems would talk to each other, and the card or the wallet would be something that is stewarded by the parents, or the individual or the school system, all sort of together harmoniously, which, the way it exists now, learning records are still very bespoke. You think about a child that goes and learns things at home, at museums, at their neighbor's house, wherever, and then they go into a school, and the school, they learn some things there, and then they change schools, they start going to kindergarten, and then they move. And ideally this would go with them. And I think that's the sort of the pie in the sky dream of some of the Web3 tech, is that the parents wouldn't then have to communicate with the school to get those records. Those records would be deposited into something that is owned by the family on behalf of that child, and then shared with the school that they move into. So kind of flipping the way that relationship is navigated. But you can imagine the infrastructure challenges associated with all that. And that idea that, when you go to school, the school is going to teach you, and you're going to receive from the school, as opposed to going into the school and saying, hey, here's what my kid already knows, and here's what they've learned elsewhere. How is that going to complement what's happening in this space? So I think it creates a whole new paradigm for thinking about where learning happens and how that's communicated to existing systems. So yeah, ideally it happens as early as kids start learning, which is anytime they interact with the world. So the Lego app that we have currently has a lot of activities in it that are built on learn through play research from the Lego Foundation. And so that pedagogical approach to playful learning is a great model, and that anyone can learn from and anyone can borrow from. And so that's the idea of partnering there, is that everything that's created is just going to be given away free out to anyone who can download that app. And we're actually even looking at offline versions for places that don't have reliable high-speed internet. So there are different ways of going about that, but ideally anybody that can access the tool would be able to store it in a wallet that they would own for their lifelong journey.
I love this idea of, I'm thinking about Greenlight that we use with our son, for example, baking for kids, and I can go in there and see what he's spent money on, right, and give him his allowance through it. And so I love that we're talking about the idea of sort of the traction around the currency of what it means to have these experiences and keep track of what they've done, but also the idea of exposure and field trips and all of these experiences that also get recorded inside of, this kind of hub, and this ongoing, almost like electronic medical record in the medical field, paralleling it to that sort of world. Allison, I know you have a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, I have a million questions. I drank coffee today, which I usually don't do, so I'm like on fire. One thing I love is like when I go to my university, I have to pay like $50 for my transcript. So I love the idea of owning my education and not having to do that. But one of my questions, I guess, is kind of around the Web 2.3, I think you said. When I'm like thinking about this, like there's this part of Web3 that's very scary because owning my education, I can lose it. You know, I can lose my seed phrase to my wallet or whatever, or getting hacked. Like it's really weird to think of someone hacking, like stealing your master's degree. So I guess I'm kind of curious about the argument y'all are having with yourselves about that. It sounds like clearly you're leaning towards more the 2 side a little bit than the 3 side. Could you talk more about that?
Yeah, there is no shortage of these like cans, and good to see you, Allison. I need one more cup of coffee. I might not quite be there, but yeah, I mean, that's the like, I think and I often catch myself where I'm like, you know, envisioning this entire paradigm shift that is night and day, different from the current model. I think it's much more like, given the problems that currently exist, can we make improvements that are 3% better, that are 5% better? Like, I think even, you know, sure, there are going to be challenges, there are going to be security concerns. A lot of that stuff is, I think, being solved in pretty interesting ways. Again, both with social and sort of technical solutions. So, you know, no avoiding some of the problems that are going to surface, but I also think I cannot see you know, if we're okay accepting that technology is evolving, always has, always will, and it's really hard to see how that isn't going to be the case, then how do we lean into it and try to shape it in a way that is just better than sort of what we currently have? And so I think that's sort of at least the mental model I try to bring more, which is like, given the problems we know that can come along with some of this, it's not techno utopian. It's not like, and there are, you know, there's a danger in going down that road and assuming that like, you know, techno solutionism, we will find the problem by way of technology. It's like, no, but I think there are really interesting, just like tweaks to be made that will make improvements. But yeah, I mean, I think there's all kinds of interesting problems to be solved. But like, I think that's what motivates us to keep rolling. It's like, we're just trying to solve them one by one, chip away.
Cool. Yeah. And it wasn't a criticism. It was just a question. So
no, there's fair criticisms, I think, to be made. I like hearing them because then we have to wrestle with them.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, if anyone loves hearing criticisms, it's Taylor. He likes to find that dynamic tension in the middle ground of both.
He does. And Taylor, I'll share. He has the best newsletter you have ever read in your life. So if you're interested, I'll forward it to you. And it's very dense and full of great tension that he holds up about how the world works and what he's thinking about. Lee, you have a question. Good to see you.
Yeah, you too. Again, you know, as you all said, safe space of not knowing a ton about this, but I heard you use the term trust architecture, and just in the world of work that I work in, which is mostly around, you know, employee development, leadership development, learning strategy, and how to kind of leverage learning, particularly in like psychologically safe kind of ways. The trust architecture thing like feels connected to that. And where I'm going with this is, 2 things. Can you define what you mean by trust architecture? And then secondly, are you kind of finding inspiration from other industries or sectors when thinking about like building belonging or like concepts of trust or something like that, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think at least in the, I guess, staying in the lane of sort of trust as it relates technically to education. Again, this idea of a learn card, trust architecture in that sense is new means by way of cryptography to allow trust to exist digitally. We have, I think, a trust crisis when it comes to digital content. this is the sort of mis and disinformation reality that we all know to exist now, that sort of just sprung on us, over a few years. And now everyone's like, whoa, what happened? Like, it's ruining democracy. Weird. Like, so I think from our perspective, it's yes, that is the macro of, can we, re-architect our technical digital systems so that they can be trustworthy. I don't have to, worry about some of the Alex Jones madness that comes with content these days, and plug that in to our systems of education in a way that and education happens to be this, like, it is fundamentally built on trust. So like, it's too bad it's not the first things people think about when they're re-architecting digital trust. Certainly the financial world sort of saw it first. This is sort of why Bitcoin was born. And then there's a lot of other industries. The Trust Over IP Foundation through Linux is it's probably one of the more mature and oldest projects exploring trust frameworks for different industries. trustoverip.org. They have all kinds of interesting ways to plug in, but it's all sort of centered around the same ideas. What does it look like to combine digital and social trust in a way that is of benefit to people? But yeah, I mean, I love this idea of trust architecture. And we use infrastructure all the time too. It's all these words I think we throw around, and they still are useful in a lot of ways, but please help when it comes to just like narratives. It sounds like you might have good means of discussing this stuff that's, that fits other contexts or is more accessible depending on the audience.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, awesome. To Nadine's question too, and then to Ellen's question, we'd love to hear about your vision for DAOs and how they fit into this conversation, since we haven't really hit on that piece yet. But Nadine's question, Nadine, jump in if I'm not doing this justice, but from more of a traditional instructional design point of view, right? Like, how do you think about the offline and the online components of this as it relates to Lee's question as well?
Yeah, and thank you. I'm not tracking the chat. If there's things worth pulling out, please do it.
Like social components, like the virtual piece, the Zoom, VR, in person, like hybridity versus something that's totally async or sync, all of those kinds of questions. How are you guys thinking about that and struggling through those questions too?
Yeah, I mean, and Nadine knows that was a previous life. I spent a long time as an ID, running a team, sort of overhauling, moving from sort of fully face-to-face to having some online courses, then through to programs, and like seeing how all that took shape. I mean, I think, our work sits underneath all of that. It's really like at the systems level infrastructure, like as much as I find myself, and Colin probably too, just because it's the lives we lived for a long time, like venturing into the actual pedagogy and content, and how do you actually, what's the marriage of this stuff with, but I think I've had to like accept that we shouldn't and can't do all of it. And like, I don't want to claim to be, the expert, or again, expert, happy to be provocative when it comes to the systems and the architecture and like the stuff that we're building under the hood, the pipes. But I don't think anything should change when it comes to like what good teaching looks like, and what good content and curriculum, and like all the stuff that my wife's a high school teacher, like, blows me away. Like that profession itself has evolved a lot. I can't do what she does now, So I think we try to intentionally, or at least I've tried to separate, like, can we build really useful systems that don't require, IDs and content folks and actual educators, and like for anyone, like they should, if you've got to like completely change the way you do your job and teach, then it's going to be a hard road. So anyway, I don't know if that answers it necessarily, but
I think it does in a way. And I actually appreciate, you saying that, like, we're not trying to solve for everything, because, that there's beauty in that too, recognizing that you shouldn't, because otherwise, you know, it probably is going to lessen what you're building. But I am thinking back to those words, and I don't remember all the words you had there, but kind of the Web3 words that you had, representation, all of that. And I think it's, hearing you say what you just said, I think it's more of shifting that. Like for me, it is interesting to kind of think about, acknowledge, and build around like, what does belonging mean in all these different aspects, right? But it's not necessarily that you need to build out this whole aspect of like in person or, you know, all these different interactions, but it's, I don't know if I'm making sense, but it's more of like, what are the principles you're integrating into your work that allows for that work to flourish in different ways, if that makes sense. So I'm kind of like, after you just said that, I'm kind of like realizing some interesting like mindset shifting that can happen.
You know, maybe a good bridge into this idea of DAOs. I mean, I think there's a misconception that all of this somehow misses the mark when it comes to like the social dynamics of humans and communities and belonging. And I think Colin would back me up. Our experience is that it only seems to strengthen it when it's done well and it comes with the right core underlying principles. When communities have digital tools, and again, I think we have to accept that those are here to stay, like pushing away the good things about what's happened digitally over the last couple of decades, I think is a quick path towards being pretty angry and sort of bitter in the world as you get older. So if we're like, yes, we'll accept that, you know, these decentralized autonomous organizations, this idea of sort of a community that aligns around an ideal or an idea, and leverages some of these technologies to be more efficient, be more democratic. Again, a lot of those words that are on that slide around self-sovereign identity, like to me, it's created some of the most interesting, culturally rich groups of people that, you know, when they do come together in person, like you get big old hugs, you get like, well, more so recently, not the last couple of years, but like, so yeah, I don't know, it's interesting. And I think that's part of like, can we point at the signals? There's a lot of noise and there's a lot of, you know, scams and DAOs that are, you know, in it for the wrong reason. But from our experience, like, and again, come to ETH Denver, you get a sense for how human all this stuff really is. So I think it can be, yeah.
Love that.
It's up to us, you know, to help move it in the right direction.
Well, and like you said, maybe just one last note and then I'll pass it on. Like you said, you know, you are starting from a place where it is, you know, based on those principles. You are a nonprofit or, you know, working through a nonprofit. And I think it sounds like, and knowing you a little bit, you and Colin, you know, you really hold true to that. And I think that is so critical and maybe the most important piece. Like, I mean, for me, when I think about data and AI, right, it's like, if you don't start like from like asking the right questions with the right people, then like everything's going to be messed up from there, right? Because it's all going to feed into it. So for me, like the way you're approaching it, I think is really beautiful in terms of like keeping it as simple as possible, but starting from a very strong foundation that can then, you know, flourish into something that who knows what's going to be in Web3 3.0. So great to hear. Yeah. And thanks.
Awesome. There's a couple more questions. Allison has a question. Allison, I'm taking this to mean from a foundation perspective of the nonprofit organization. Like, what are those expectations of your board? Like, what are you being asked to do? What are the requirements, desires from that sort of foundation perspective?
Yeah, and is that the right framing on it?
Yeah,
right,
I was gonna say I can read the question. I was just curious to know what your stakeholders or even like your users are asking of you.
Yeah, it's I was gonna say stakeholders is as varied as it gets. Like we cross over so many different groups. Our like core, also a good plug for the Super Skills DAO, which is like just, you guys are the first crew probably. I think it was maybe like internally 10 or 20 people, but we are actually going to try to kind of launch a more community driven with some NFT ownership over some things. Anyway, I kind of forgot about it, but wanted to plug it because part of it is currently our stakeholder group and our board and some of our like core, advisors and folks. I think they are all trying to, they see the opportunity. They understand that there's a lot of demand. We've crossed over this threshold where now, opportunity is more the problem than, it is and it's a good place to be. Like, I certainly can't complain, like we have too much interest, but I think the core stakeholders around us are like building the guardrails to ensure that we stay true to those values. And like, actually, it's easy to just, and we have a lot of like, oh, look at that shiny thing, we got to go figure it out, chase it down. How does it fit? So I think that's mostly, it's just like the right kind of ethical guardrails to just keep the ship moving in the right direction. We just recently like refined our vision and mission. I mean, this stuff is still evolving in real time. But in fact, yeah, I'd be curious to get feedback too. Colin, I don't know, we should dig up the latest mission statement and see how it sits for people. And then, yeah, I mean, users, that's still, aside from the super skills and some of those groups, I don't know if Colin wants to speak to it. Like, it's not like we have a ton of users. Our users, quote unquote, are like governments, other agencies, folks internal that are like wanting to see some of these systems come to be. It's not like there's, a huge number of like learners at scale interacting with this stuff. So yeah, we're on the verge of, I think, learning a lot as that happens.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I'd love to just share with everybody in the room now. Taylor comes to this work from being faculty at a university before the foundation, and Colin comes to the work from independent schools, some of the best in Chicago and in Boulder, Colorado. So they have like a really interesting perspective on what they bring to the work and how they see what they're working to do in terms of vision and who the stakeholders are and all that good stuff. Ruben, I love your question. I just met Ruben recently, and he's a fellow at Northwestern doing some amazing academic research. Do you want me to ask the question, or do you want to throw it out there, Ruben?
Go for it.
Yeah. So he's wondering about skills. So, who's to say who these skills are as we're talking about them now? And, asking just based on the historic patterns of what we've seen in the US and, equity. We often talk about things from more of a deficit lens, particularly for people of color. So how are you talking about that and thinking about that?
Yeah, I think the hope and goal is to have sort of weak-centered networks. This is something we talk quite a bit about. How do you allow for sort of the balance of oversight and governance, and those that do have an understanding and interest in why how to ensure that a skill is what it says it is and is meaningful in whatever context. That in combination with, individuals, this is the sort of self-sovereign piece, also having, I should be able to sort of define in a lot of ways what skill is valuable to me and based on my goals. And like, this is the sort of, everyone takes a different path towards the top of the mountain sort of idea, why we use some of that, but like, that's the balance, right? We've got these interesting, again, trust networks that are trying to balance those two things. And some of what you can do digitally now with some of these interesting means of cryptography and Web3 stuff is to give agency back to the individual to make some of those decisions, but maybe within a framework that is predefined, or, there's all this work is not to discount like governance authorities or existing bodies of knowledge and research and things that like already have you know, efficacy sort of behind why they exist. But there's a lot of, I think there's a lot of trust baked into things by way of historical signals that don't have value and like shouldn't be, the Ivy League shouldn't have as much meaning as they do. I don't think, not that they shouldn't, but like, so it's finding that balance. I mean, that's part of the work. It's tricky, but I think that's also what's fun. It's like seeing people really empowered and like being able to take control and have some agency over how their life evolves. I think often that's dictated by our parents. For those like in a more privileged position that like you had to go to college, that was the path. And I know at some point I would have, you know, that was certainly my mindset all the way through up until grad school. And I'm like, man, yeah, it would have been kind of cool to have a little more agency and control. Oh, and get paid along the way. Part of it is also just the, you know, the cost that comes with those degrees that may or may not actually lead to opportunities.
Yeah.
I rambled there a bit, but yeah.
Good stuff. Yeah,
And let me
thanks.
let me share the deck too. I meant to do that.
Yeah, sounds great. And Ellen,
that?
you could bring us home for the last couple of minutes here. I know you had one thing you
Oh
mentioned.
yeah, it's more of just like a putting this in like a specific use case for my own brain. But like I used to take kids on these kind of robust field trips at this nonprofit called Embark. But anyway, so say that we were going to the Museum of Science and Industry and they had like an all-day 3D printing workshop. And so like in this case with the Learn card, say, like the Museum of Science and Industry would maybe with Open Skills Network or something say like this workshop has these skills built into it. And when the kids like leave this workshop, they scan their card and get those like skills like uploaded onto it. And so that they can take them wherever. Is that kind of like the idea?
Yeah, I think that fits, and that's the fun exploratory part of all this, like how that gets defined, the programmable verifiable credential, like this idea, and we love the analogy just because of PVC piping and like how revolutionary that was for actual plumbing in cities. You know, so yeah, if you have that in place, then like the sky's the limit on what that museum or that learning experience, like how they want those things to have value and be, you know, sort of brought into the world. The one with Lego that I think is easy and is hopefully something we can work towards is, you know, as students go through, build these sort of, you know, treasure chests of skills that are represented as verifiable credentials. They could then potentially go to a Lego store and, you know, redeem those for a Lego set as currency. I mean, this is sort of the bridging of skills and learning and knowledge as a, you know, literal currency in the world. That's just an obvious, like, cool, I go get some Legos that actually are, you know,
Yeah.
a physical instantiation of skills as currency that I earned by going through and demonstrating something. So, but how that looks in a museum versus, you know, a welding certificate program versus like, yeah, that's all going to be contextual, you know, but
Cool.
if you have thoughts or ideas, like,
earn.
please.
Yeah.
We're always open. I love
Super
hearing
cool.
about just like how this stuff can get pieced together and, you know, unlock and open doors.
This was awesome. Thank you guys so much.
Yeah, thanks you guys. Taylor, thank you, Colin, for all the amazing links, as Allison pointed out in the chat. So good, so wonderful. And yeah, good to see all of you. What a great discussion. I mean, I'm jazzed. I'm so inspired after all of this and have a lot to look into. And yeah, thank you. And yeah, really good to see you, Taylor. And thanks for spending the time and putting the notes in the deck together. We really appreciate it. We learned a lot.
Same. Yeah. Love to stay in touch and good to see you always, Erin.
Thanks. All right, guys.
Thanks,
Have a
Awesome.
great day.
Thank
See you
you.
later.
Thank you.
Bye.
Well.